So here's a little baseball trivia for you on a spring Tuesday. Kirby Higbee was a starting pitcher in the majors in the 1940s. He was also an opponent of integration, which is why when Jackie Robinson, the first black ball player in the modern era, was about to join the Brooklyn Dodgers, Higbee demanded a trade, and he got one. He ended up on the Pirates. But Higbee couldn't avoid Robinson for very long. On July 15th, 1948, Higbee pitched a game against Robinson and the Dodgers, and maybe coincidentally, but probably not, Higbee hit one batter that game, Jackie Robinson, and it turned out to be a costly move in the context of the game. Robinson went on to advance to third base, then stole home plate and helped the Dodgers beat the Pirates 7-6. Now, for Jackie Robinson, these kinds of cheap shots were common. He was often harassed on and off the field because of his skin color. That was the price of integrating sports in the 1940s, as the history books have taught us, and it's conventional wisdom at this point. What's not conventional wisdom, even though it should be, is that racial resentment can still be found in professional sports. It's just that it goes in the opposite direction. And nowhere is that more evident than the league that, until recently, nobody ever talked about, much less watched, the WNBA. By now, you've probably seen the footage of Caitlin Clark, the former Iowa Hawkeyes player and now rookie on a team that we all just learned existed called the Indiana Fever. And in the footage, Clark, who is widely regarded as one of the greatest female athletes of all time, is assaulted on the court during a game on Saturday. She was hip-checked to the ground during the third quarter by Chicago Sky guard Kennedy Carter. And there was no reason whatsoever for Carter to shove Clark's hip and knock her over. The ball hadn't even been inbounded yet, so it was totally egregious and unnecessary. Here it is, watch.
Kennedy Carter now with 12
But it was a rough night for Caitlin Clark and the Indiana Fever. Last night, she only scored 3 points in a blowout loss to the New York Liberty. But it was a game on Saturday between the Fever and the Chicago Sky that had a lot of people talking. Fans were so hyped for Caitlin, Angel Reese, and Camila Cardoso to all be back on the same court. However, the moment that made headlines, this right here, the hard foul involving Clark and Kennedy Carter.
This morning, this physical moment involving the WNBA's most high-profile rookie raising questions.
Unnecessary.
Chicago's Kennedy Carter shoulder-checking the Fever's Caitlin Clark, knocking her to the ground. The call initially deemed a common foul by officials.
A little surprised that it's nothing more than a common foul beyond that.
So the game had a lot of people talking, says the Good Morning America anchorwoman. There's no love lost between these two teams, says the reporter. They're giving fans a show. Now, that's a very sing-songy way to describe an unprovoked shove to the floor. And it's especially odd considering the fact that after she knocked Clark over, Kennedy Carter appeared to mouth a 5-letter epithet that begins with the letter B. And later, as David Hookstead noted at Outkick, Carter then went on social media to like the following tweets. Quote, "Kennedy, get her one more time for me. That was a crazy-ass flop. Let him know, Hollywood. And put Caitlin Lil ass in the basket." Now, those were, allegedly, that was all English, some variation of English. Now, of course, liking tweets doesn't necessarily mean that Kennedy Carter endorses them, but it certainly appears that she does endorse those sentiments based on all the information we have, including the fact that Carter eventually told reporters she has no regrets about what happened, even though any reasonable person would have a lot of regrets about what happened if it had been an accident. Watch.
I think at the end of the day, I'm a competitor. Now that it's another day, I've had an off day, now I can answer your questions and I can let you know how I really feel about things. But I'm a competitor and I'm going to compete no matter who you are and no matter who's in front of me. So that's just what it was. Heat of the moment play, we're getting at it, we're going back and forth. It's basketball, it's all hoops. After we finish the game, it's all love.
Do you have any regrets on how it happened and everything that's happened since then?
I don't have any regrets with anything. I'm going to compete and play 100% hard no matter who it is, like I said, or who we're playing. No, I don't have any regrets.
Now, it's impossible not to conclude that Kennedy Carter harbors a lot of disdain for Caitlin Clark, and there are a couple possible explanations why. One explanation, the one that has nothing to do with racism and which a lot of media outlets are running with, is that Carter is simply jealous that a rookie like Clark has managed to do the impossible, which is to make the WNBA a topic of discussion. And there's no doubt that Clark has indeed accomplished that. In just 5 games, the Indiana Fever, with Caitlin Clark on the team, have already exceeded their total attendance from all 20 home games last season combined. And the same is not remotely true for the Chicago Sky or for any other team in the league. That appears to bother the players on the Chicago Sky quite a bit. They seem to be in intense denial about it. Here's one of Kennedy Carter's teammates, Angel Reese. Reese also happens to have something of a history with Carter dating back to their college years. Get into that in a second. But here's Reese's assessment of why Clark is so popular. Watch.
It all started from the national championship game, and I've been dealing with this for 2 years now. And understanding, like, yeah, negative things have probably been said about me, but honestly, I'll take that because look where women's basketball is. People are talking about women's basketball, but you never would think that we'd be talking about women's basketball. People are pulling up to games. We got celebrities coming to games, sold out arenas, like, just because of one single game. And just looking at that, like, I'll take that role. I'll take the bad guy role, and I'll continue to take that on and be that for my teammates. And if I want to be that, and I know I'll go down in history, I'll look back in 20 years and be like, yeah, the reason why we watching women's basketball is not just because of one person. It's because of me, too, and I want y'all to realize that.
The reason why we're watching women's basketball is not just because of one person. It's because of me, too. I want y'all to realize that, she says. Now, that's obviously not true. In fact, it's extremely easy to prove that it's false. As somebody pointed out online, when the Chicago Sky hosted the Los Angeles Sparks, which is another team that exists, apparently the total attendance was around 8,000. But when the Indiana Fever and Caitlin Clark hosted the same team, the Los Angeles Sparks, the attendance was over 16,000. This is what they call a controlled experiment in the business. Fans are lining up to see Caitlin Clark. Even when they move her team to larger arenas, they still sell out. And even during away games, kids are lining up for photographs with her. Watch. So when you watch all this, it's obvious that there's some jealousy at play. A league full of terrible basketball players with no moral character will naturally become deeply uncomfortable when a good player finally arrives. But it doesn't take a lot of digging to realize that something else is going on here, something that's elevating that jealousy into on-court violence. The truth is that Clark has been the subject of intense scrutiny because of her race even before she was drafted. And that's now spilling out into the open, both on the court and off the court. So take Angel Reese, for example. During last year's NCAA championship game, Reese made a taunting hand gesture right in Caitlin Clark's face. It was a callback to when Clark had made a similar gesture earlier in the tournament, but Reese claimed that she received more criticism, not because of how she had performed the gesture or the context of it, but because she's black. Quote, "I'm too ghetto," she said. "I don't fit in a box that y'all want me to be in. I'm too hood. So this was for me, this was for the girls that look like me that's going to speak up on what they believe in." It's really hard to read some of these quotes. This is the racial dimension that has underlied criticism of Caitlin Clark for a long time and continues to do so. There are almost too many examples to count, but I'll start with what former WNBA player Cheryl Swoops said about Clark just a few months ago on a podcast. While she was wearing a shirt that read, "Female, Fearless, and Black," she appeared on the podcast. As Outkick reported on the podcast, she said, quote, "Swoops tried to undermine Clark's legacy with a series of inaccuracies and lies. She claimed that we must take Clark's record-breaking career with a grain of salt because she played 5 years of collegiate basketball, is not a true senior, shoots 40 times a game, and is 25 years old playing against teenagers. None of that is true, but she doubled down on her inaccuracies throughout the week. She responded to critics with demeaning memes of white women. She called those questioning her them and ignorant." And here's what one of those memes looked like. You can see the image. And eventually, amid the backlash, Swoops appeared again on the podcast and remarked, quote, "For people to come at me and say that I made those comments about Clark because I'm a racist, first of all, black people can't be racist, but that's the farthest thing from my mind." Now, we've talked about this non-argument on the show before. The idea that black people can't be racist makes no sense, but a handful of sociology professors in the UK have apparently convinced a lot of people otherwise because they came up with this idea, and now it's suddenly true because they said it. And that's what Swoops believes anyway, and she's essentially saying that if you so much as commit a microaggression against her, say that you praise her hairstyle, God forbid, or ask her where she was born, then you deserve to lose your job. But if somebody, say, knocks a white woman over while calling her the B word, that's definitely not racist. That's equity. Now, this is the kind of anti-white racism that Caitlin Clark is now very familiar with. Just last week, for instance, the Tennessean ran a piece arguing, quote, "Caitlin Clark's whiteness makes her more marketable. That's not racist, it's true." And the thrust of the article is that whiteness has enduring marketability. And the media is racist because of their, quote, "prior refusal to push the WNBA with the same fervor it's had this year." There's also a complaint that Caitlin Clark has a deal with Nike, while it's relatively rare for a black WNBA player to have a, quote, signature shoe with a major brand. In other words, Caitlin Clark is only getting all this attention because she's white. Never mind the fact that there are other white players in WNBA who have not achieved anywhere near as much attention. Never mind the fact that Caitlin Clark set several all-time records, becoming the first player in Division I history to have consecutive 1,000-point seasons, as well as the all-time scoring leader with nearly 4,000 career points. We're supposed to pretend, according to the Tennessean, that none of that really matters. All that fans in Nike really care about is that she's white. Because of course, Nike has never endorsed any black athletes. That's never happened. It's not as though the most iconic and profitable athlete endorsement of all time was Nike's endorsement of a black guy named Michael Jordan. I mean, it's not as though LeBron James makes hundreds of millions of dollars a year on endorsements. None of that has ever happened, obviously. But as insane as all this may be, there's a lot of this kind of commentary going around, and a lot of it is pretty explicit. For example, there was also the Los Angeles Aces player, A'ja Wilson, saying that Clark is only popular because she's white, quoting from NBC Boston. Though Clark hasn't said anything to fuel the black-white narrative surrounding her meteoric rise, talks about a double standard are being had. Quote, I think it's a huge thing. I think a lot of people may say it's not about black and white, but to me it is. Las Vegas Aces star A'ja Wilson said when asked about the race element in Clark's popularity and before she recently signed 2 major endorsement deals. They don't see it as marketable, so it doesn't matter how hard I work. It doesn't matter what we all do as black women. We're still going to be swept underneath the rug. That's why it boils my blood when people say it's not about race, because it is. Translation, put aside the fact that A'ja Wilson herself also has a deal with Nike and a signature shoe. Ignore the fact that A'ja Wilson didn't perform nearly as well as Caitlin Clark did in college or come anywhere close to matching her career points record or any of her other records. And disregard how many people find it just more enjoyable to watch Caitlin Clark's style of play than A'ja Wilson's. You can't consider any of that. All you can consider is that Caitlin Clark is white. Jameel Hill has said something similar, claiming that Clark's fame is problematic and related to her race and sexuality. But true to form, no one said it dumber than the women of The View. Watch.
I do think that there is a thing called pretty privilege. There is a thing called white privilege. There is a thing called tall privilege. And we have to acknowledge that. And so the part of it is about race, because if you think about the Brittany Griners of the world, you know, why did she have to go to play in Russia?
Because they wouldn't pay her.
Because they wouldn't pay her. I do think that she is more relatable to more people because she's white, because she's attractive. And unfortunately, there still is that stigma of against the LGBTQ plus community. 70% of the WNBA is black. A third of the players are in the LGBTQ plus community. And we have to do something about that stigma in this country. I think that people have a problem with basketball playing women that are lesbians.
Yes, when will somebody pay attention to black basketball players? When will that finally happen? When will there be a black star in professional basketball? When will the time finally come? Now, you just heard Sonny Hostin say that Caitlin Clark benefits from being white, straight, and also tall. Tall privilege. I guess the implication is that the short players deserve endorsement deals to make up for the fact that they're not as good at basketball. Or maybe the idea is that Caitlin Clark is the first tall person to ever succeed in basketball, which is true if you don't count literally every other basketball player ever, except for maybe Muggsy Bogues. But against all odds, there was actually something interesting in what Sonny Hostin said, although not in the way she intended. She made the point that WNBA is overwhelmingly black, and that's true. Well over 60% of the players are black. Now, even aside from the more overt anti-white racism that Caitlin Clark has been subjected to, that fact raises perhaps a bigger and more noticeable point here, which is that Caitlin Clark isn't being celebrated as a pioneer or a champion of diversity. The WNBA, like the NBA, has very few white players, even fewer who are stars. Anyone who champions diversity should celebrate Clark explicitly because she is white. Yet even those in the media who are friendly to Clark will certainly not applaud her for helping to diversify the WNBA. You're not going to hear that. Sonny Hostin certainly isn't celebrating Clark bringing diversity to the league. Instead, she's doing segments justifying the fact that, she got knocked over on the court, accusing her of having tall privilege and so on. Now, if anything highlights how fraudulent the so-called diversity or DEI movements really are, it's this. It's the relentless effort to demean Caitlin Clark, the single most diverse star in the WNBA's history, at every possible turn. Even when she's attacked on the court, they're still ridiculing her. And of course, the whole episode also exposes once again the lie behind the feminist push for the WNBA. They don't actually want more people to see women's sports. All that time they lamented the non-existent attendance numbers and ticket sales. They didn't really mean it, apparently. They'd rather push more racial grievances. That's their only goal. And it's a goal that's all-consuming, obsessive, and fundamentally at its core anti-white. It destroys everything it touches. And now at last, it might be what finally kills the WNBA for good. If you'd like to see what else I have to say, you can access my full show by going to dailywire.com or by going to the Matt Walsh Show Twitter page. Hope to see you there. Godspeed.